is, what you want to put into it. It's always there. It's a service business like any other service business, but be intuitive, be curious. How about be polite and eager to work?
Sure.
And there's no stopping you. There really is no stopping you.
Hello, and welcome to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group. I am your host, Matt Allred. In this podcast, we talk to the people whose lives and careers are dedicated to the vertical transportation industry to inform and share lessons learned, building upon the foundation of those who have gone before to inspire the next generation of elevator careers. Today, our guest is Nick Montesano, CEO and President of DTM Drafting and Consulting Services. Nick started as a helper with Millar Elevator in New York City in 1979. In 1984, Nick joined his father, Joseph C. Montesano, at the family consulting business. Nick has been in the industry 43 years, and he is passionate about ensuring that the elevator industry and elevator professionals continue to be successful and well respected. Nick, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to get to know you a little bit better, to dig into your story. And the question I always like to start with is, tell me how you got started in the elevator industry.
Well, that's a great one. Long history here. I'm 43, just about 43 years in the industry now, and like many of the interviewers you've had in the past, Matt, my dad was in the business, right? He was a Korean War vet. He came out of there. He had expertise in drafting in high school back in those days, and that was a trade that a lot of people went into at that time. And one of his uncles that lived in Manhattan said, "Hey, there's this company called Westinghouse looking for draftsmen," and hence, he started in the industry drafting and eventually worked up to being one of the top professionals in the office for Westinghouse into his 50s. And then he saw an opportunity for consulting. I had started out of high school right into the industry. I've always worked with my dad, working on people's houses, electrical, fixing small appliances. Back in the day, people didn't throw everything away. It wasn't a throw it; it was a fix. No one, no one had the money to throw stuff away. So I have been working with my hands since I was 7, 8 years old, following him around when we'd wire up family members' houses, and really appreciate hands-on. Then when I became a teenager, it was automobiles. Fixing up the third hand-me-down automobile I got from a family member, and working on cars in high school. And
Sure.
So I knew I would be a tradesman. The opportunity came to go to college. And at that time, anything else that interests me was probably accounting. But my father asked me, he said, "I can't get you in Westinghouse, but do you want to come get into the elevator field?" And I said, "You know what? I think I want to give it a shot and give it a try." And here I am that many years later.
Very cool. So when you said a tradesman, were you in the union? Were you a mechanic, or where did you start exactly?
No, so I started with Millar Elevator in 1979.
Okay.
They were the Manhattan leading independent at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, the big OEMs had most of the share of the work in those days, the Otis and
Sure.
and the Westinghouse. So yeah, I started with Millar. As a matter of fact, the funny story is I went in for the interview, took one of those basic mechanical tests, and went into some senior vice president's office, and he said, "Okay, great, you're hired." And I said, "Well, when do you want me to start?" He goes, "Well, I'd start tomorrow." I said, "Tomorrow? I'm not 18 then." I was turning 18 in a week. He goes, "When are you 18?" I said, "Next month." You go, "See you next Monday." So that's right out of just legal 18, and started showing up. 40 Wall Street, Manhattan, famous building downtown, and started my career there with the Millar Elevator, and enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. So started at 18, just kind of right out of the gate, and you were, I assume, a helper or apprentice. What was the title?
Oh, yeah. I was so green. I walked into 40 Wall, and I was looking at the building list of where the tenants are, and I'm looking up and down, and one of the starters, an old Irish gentleman, great guy, looked over. He, back then there was at least 2 or 3 starters in the lobby. And he come over and he goes, "What are you looking for? Who are you looking for?" And I said, "Millar." He goes, "Oh, you'll never find them on there." He goes, "Let me call the mechanic for you." And yeah, started as a helper. Back in that day, the industry, every mechanic that had a resident building, if you were in a building full time, you had a helper full time. And if you were a mechanic on a route, there was one helper split between two mechanics on a route.
Okay.
So, half a week you were with either mechanic. So there were a lot of helpers in the industry back then. Downtown area, there had to be 10 of us.
Right.
Sometimes it would, reach up to 12. Millar had a pretty good foothold in the city, particularly downtown in a financial area. So yeah, I started the apprenticeship and haven't looked back.
Yeah. Yeah. How long before you realized that you had made the right choice career wise?
Yeah, well, I guess that's a tricky question because some of those days you think that through, right? Wait a second, what am I doing here, and why am I putting up with this? Things were different back then. I always enjoyed it right out of the gate for a lot of the reasons I think people you've interviewed or continue to interview will tell you. There's a real it's a real freedom to this job. First of all, maybe not as a helper, but as you get into it as a mechanic, it's not like your boss is over your back every day and you're sitting at a desk and you're being monitored or anything. That I enjoy that. And then I enjoyed the opportunity to work with my hands. And then I've worked for many of a great person in my years and some not so great. But I think I knew right out of the gate once I got comfortable, understanding what it was. I mean, the first couple of days I knew how to fix stuff. I didn't know elevators,
Cool.
but I could pick up a tool and know not to, electrocute myself. But there was, there were times there you had tough days. But I could tell you right out of the gate, I knew I wanted this and I
Awesome.
wanted it to work. And I think that's important because you need that, right?
Sure.
I think a lot of the successful people you've interviewed in the past, and I know for over 40 years, they want it to work. So you don't just bail the first time it's a difficult day or a difficult week or a difficult mechanic or a difficult supervisor or a difficult project.
Sure.
And some days you question yourself on that. But yeah, I knew right away. And I was just lucky enough to be blessed with this industry.
Right. And I have been told that, yeah, those first year or two, or maybe it's just 6 months, it just depends until you kind of earn some respect from the mechanics and, hey, I'm not going anywhere. That can be a bit of a challenge to kind of start out that way.
Well, that's an understatement. Remember, I'm going back to 79, right? In the 80s.
Right.
If they did a third of what they did to us, then now they'd be in jail. So they press you, right?
Sure.
It's an initiation, sort of. Nothing crazy like pledging or anything, but they want to see, they're trying to see who you are as a person.
Sure.
Are you right for the industry? Because too, there's a safety aspect right out of day one.
Absolutely.
Whether you're a helper, a mechanic, a mod, a new construction, right out of the gate, you're responsible for yourself and usually most of the people you're working around. So they're going to push your limits. And I've definitely had stories I could tell you. I don't think you have enough time. If you want 3 podcasts, I could do it. But there were times you get pushed. But yeah, it's at least, it's what you put into it, right?
Absolutely.
With any job. So
Sure.
when I showed up and I wanted to try it and I got past the nervousness of getting to the city, meeting new people, high-rise buildings, all of that, I really, made it an effort. I wanted to do what was right. Not that I was an angel all the time. No one is.
Sure.
But I would be the guy that would listen. I would be the guy taking notes. I would be the guy asking what else I could do.
Sure.
And then once they saw that in you, I'm going to tell you 99% of the mechanics would help you, train you, want you to do well, help you advance. They would really, really tight industry like that. Once they
Right.
know your part and willing to go the extra mile, it almost becomes easy.
Yeah, well, I think so. Once they can trust you and know what you're about, and it goes back to the stories I hear over and over and over that, I worked with so and so 30 years ago, and I called him up and he helped me walk through this thing, and that level of camaraderie is something I haven't seen in other industries at all. I mean, I haven't worked in every industry, but touched a lot of them over the years, and so to have that level of relationships. I mean, you probably still have people 43 years in the industry. You can probably call them up 40 years later and walk through an issue.
It's amazing. It's so true. It's so true. And back then, remember, we had a little bit of a luxury based on the amount of people that the elevator company would have in an area, right?
Sure.
Things have changed because of financing and, the accountants looking at time and overhead. So it's not as flush with mechanics and helpers as it was obviously back in that day, but 100%. And that's comforting, right? Because none of us are going to know everything.
True.
And particularly technically, some are going to be better mechanically, some are going to be better reading prints, handling solid state boards.
Sure.
I can tell you stories about that. So it was easy to pick up the phone. I mean, you had to actually go to a payphone in those days, right? None
Sure.
of us, we had beepers at one point, and that was like, oh my God, we got a beeper, But yeah, we were always there to help each other. There was always that one outcast guy who maybe didn't help you that much, so you go to your other buddies first, But when it came down to it, you really needed you always had someone there to help you. And even as you said, to this day, of the group I still see for either certification classes or I know have retired but show up 1 or 2 days a month to help the elevator company they were with for 20 years with special projects. It's just like yesterday, except they're grandparents now, and they got that, their grandkids are getting married in some cases,
Yeah.
So it's really, and that's what's different. We've talked a little bit about this in the past. It's really what's different about this industry. You don't see that in other industries. Even though we have competition and we have competitors, it was a camaraderie, right? We were
Sure.
there. There was some, I'm this local, I'm that local, or I'm that company and that company, but a little bit that's just showmanship,
Sure.
It's when it comes down to it, if we all met at a bar or met at a family outing or a retirement party, there'd be multi people there from different companies at that retirement party because everybody keeps in touch.
Yeah.
And everybody really just wants to see everyone else succeed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've seen that. I see that a lot. So, so how long were you in the field? You started as a helper with Millar, and then what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so that was that was, for me, it was great in the beginning. For a whole year, I was in 40 Wall Street as the helper to one resident mechanic. So I really got a lot of learning, a lot of hands-on there. Overtime was there too to help if they needed weekend work and doing freight car maintenance and that kind of stuff. So the money was good. And then I had to start going to the school, the union school.
Okay.
And that union school was fails in comparison to what they have now out there,
Okay.
bringing new people in and training. It's amazing what the unions are doing these days. And even some of the non-union shops on their educational program that are certified.
Sure.
Really, I mean, I was lucky some of the times if the teacher would show up, and that's tough because you had to do 2 days a week,
Sure.
right, for the 4 years. And you had to go, or in my case, it was still downtown, but it was somewhere in the village, and, getting there after a full day worth of work, you're not getting home then till 10 o'clock at night. But that's what you do when you join an industry, right?
Sure.
You commit to it. So eventually the teaching got better, the school, the programs got more educational, and you got something out of it. That was about 4 years when I graduated. And then at that time, they were ready, they were talking about putting me up as a mechanic.
Okay.
And then the local I was in at the time, you didn't have to take a mechanics test. You did your training kind of during the whole course
Okay.
of that apprenticeship program. And then they came to me and say, hey, we're going to put you out. And there were different levels of mechanic. The first time you go out, you're a B mechanic, then you could be A. And then I think there was like a double A. So they put me out, and they moved me into Midtown. As a mechanic, because I had my other 3 years still downtown. And then
Right.
the fourth year I moved to Midtown, and they actually put me in another very beautiful, prestigious building, the Chrysler Building in Manhattan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And what was really interesting that I hope some of the listeners would enjoy, at the time I went into that building, which had to be maybe 83 at the time, well, 80, 79, 81-ish, 82-ish.
Okay.
It was the first building with computerized dispatching in the low-rise motor room.
Wow.
And it was designed by John Pierre, who was one of the leading industry with solid state dispatching. And there was the low-rise motor room that had a tile floor down. Okay.
Nice.
It had dimmed lights. Dimmer switches weren't around back then for your normal household lighting.
Right.
But they had to dim the switch. We had to keep the lights dim. There were orange tile floor. And then the dispatcher was in its own room in the secondary level with a smoked plexiglass cover to the dispatcher.
Right.
And what you saw were the little different dots lighting up. And those were the modulars used. And that was a big showcase for Millar to
Sure.
bring all these owners. Hey, we got the latest technology in comparison to even the big manufacturers, or
Wow.
as equal.
Sure.
And I was responsible to make sure that room was looking presentable if anyone was being walked through the door to see and it really looked pretty cool. It looked like something out of, Star Wars at the time.
Right.
And in addition to that, having the dispatching, and it was only in the low rise, the solid state dispatching, the whole building had went to GE value drives. Those were replacing motor generators. I had replaced it prior to me getting there. And that was like the latest and greatest technology. And talking about handling solid state stuff, I had a great mechanic in there, Danny Kirk, who was formerly with Otis. And he was the type of guy, once he trusted you, like we mentioned earlier, and he knew you were going to work hard, he'd have you right next to him. So as a helper, I was well trained in all the solid state components, including the drive units, which were a little bit of a mystery back then. It wasn't like any real diagnostic. You had to have the meter at the right spot at the time it failed to try and eliminate process of elimination for solid state boards. And you could think at that time what these boards cost. So we had them locked up in a cabinet in the protective, we had to make sure we were static safe and all that. And I would have mechanics walking in because we were the depot for having those boards once they started to branch out and be installed in more buildings. And they would come in and say, I don't know, the light goes out on the big board in the middle. And I'm like, oh, that's the MCC board. And I'll get you, you got to check this, and they're looking at me like, wait, you're a helper. Why are you telling me what to do? But then they appreciate it because they had no idea what to do.
Right.
And of course, back then boards had to be signed in, similar to
Sure.
now. So yeah, I really got great exposure working with great mechanics like Danny Kirk, and it was just amazing. So from there, they put me out in the Chrysler Kent building, which was attached.
Okay.
So it was an older building on the backside. Instead of on Lex, it was on Third. And I was a mechanic there. And I think I had like 15 units in it, old relay logic, Otis controllers with the ply plate selectors. And then I had a surge dispatching overlay. And the weirdest thing is they put this overlay panel on top of the elevators.
That's interesting.
So I'm like, I don't know why. I don't know how. All I know is when I had walked in and a bank wasn't dispatching, I had to get on top of cars to press relays. So not one of the safety procedures you'd be allowed to do now, but really crazy industry.
Very interesting. So you mentioned Danny. Who were some of the mentors that really put an impact on you?
Yeah, Pat Kramer was one of the early guys, and Pat was a shop steward too at the time, and he would be the type that he made sure every day we sit down for an hour and went over electrical prints. He'd also be the type having me save my own soup cans at home after eating soup, clean them, paint them black, and then paint the Millar emblem on them so we could hang them under the secondary sheds to catch the oil drips. So, this was one extreme to the other.
That's impressive.
Yeah, I still to this day, I've lost touch with Pat. I heard he had obviously retired out. But yeah, he was the type. And the only funny story with him is we would never, he'd always make sure if we got a call, he'd always think of the worst scenario. Oh, the traveling cables must be short. I'm like, Pat, it's Friday at 2:00. Why do you wish that on us? I'm single. I want to go home.
Right.
You're married. You may want to stay here and try and troubleshoot an open traveling cable for the next 6 hours. I would like to get home. So he was great. Danny Kirk, I mentioned, he was superior in solid state.
Sure.
There were a bunch more that I just can't remember most of their names now. But even my local supervisor here, when I was a helper, Tom Marino, there were two Marinos in Millar. One was the expert on the Westinghouse side. The other was on everything else. And that was the Tom that was downtown. He would hang out down in his, shanty down at 20 Exchange Place. And he was a sweetheart of a guy, a little bit tougher boss when he had to be tough, but
Sure.
he knew the industry. He knew what the helpers were going through. And then even to add to a funnier story, I've hired a bunch of these guys over the years to come work for me now. I mean, Al Sano was the assistant supervisor when I came, and I must have been downtown for a week and a half, and I get beat to go meet Al in front of 20 Exchange, and I knew who he was. He introduced himself. This is how he introduced himself. I was cleaning secondary levels, and I was, climbed up the ladder, got into the secondary. And I was, I believe the car I was working on was shut down, but you still had to walk, you were crawling between cars, right? The other
Sure.
cars were in. So all of a sudden I hear the door open to the secondary level, and I walk to the edge and I see Al, and I said, "Hello, sir." And he goes, "Hi." He goes, "How you doing? You're being careful up there?" I said, "Yes, I'm being careful." He goes, "You see that shiv?" And there was a tape shiv on one of the cars earlier in front of the secondary, and it's going around, and Otis uses the solid tapes.
Okay.
And those edges are sharp as razors. He goes, "You see that?" He goes, "You touch that, you'll lose your fingers if you're lucky enough just to lose your fingers."
Mm.
So I said to him, I said, "Al, I'll make sure I don't touch that, get near it." Hence, he retires from Millar. He comes to me part-time to be one of my inspectors.
Cool.
And then he retires out from me. So we had a retirement. It's probably going back about a year and a half or 2 years before COVID. I said, at his going away thing and in the restaurant, I had to put a group together from my company, plus some of the old guys still around from Millar and a couple of other associates that knew Al for 30, 40 years. And I said, "Al, I can tell you I paid attention to you." And I held all my fingers up. I still got them, Al. So thank you for that. But he, those are the stories with great people. And that's how the industry was and still is to an extent. Unfortunately, there's not as much time allocated to anybody or anything now, which you kind of lose that time to, really become close like that and really work as a team to make what's best for the job. And, Millar was a great company. They treated you great and they expected a lot out of you. But you know what? You were more than happy to do it. They were the type of company, if you went above and beyond for them, they rewarded you financially. They praised you. And that's hard to say. Some people say, "No, Nick's full of it," because no one praised anybody in LVNH. But let me tell you, if you worked a water damage for them, besides putting the hours in at overtime, you got dinner. And in many times you were able to stay on the clock until the super got home from the job. So it's just basically giving you another hour for travel.
Sure.
And that's just as a thank you for you coming to do your job because they needed your help.
Right.
So that's what a lot of us grasp in the industry, the friendships, the camaraderie, the fact that you're rewarded besides being a very lucrative industry to start as a trade person to come in.
Right. True. So that's how you got your start. Sounds like you had some awesome mentors. You had a great learning opportunity and to work at really a New York icon, the Chrysler Building. So how many years were you in the field before you moved to the next step?
Yeah. So the next step was, I was in the Chrysler Building, and my father had decided at 52 years old to give consulting a shot. And we could go into that a little bit more detail in a minute because that was unusual at that time in 1982. And I had been helping him out on weekends and nights, when he needed help. He was going out mostly to do the design and engineering of the building, the vertical systems for the new buildings or modernizations. And I was in the Chrysler, and unfortunately there was an incident on a freight car where someone got hurt, and that's always, that's the industry, right? It's safety.
Sure.
There are unfortunately accidents. So, it winded up, unfortunately, some vandalism was done on an elevator, a hallway with no lights, and this poor delivery guy winds up falling 2 floors down the shaft.
Mm.
So, that always sets you back. That's
Sure.
like, that's drama right there, right? It's hard to go through something like that. And at that same time, my father had been picking up business, and he's like, and I was already a mechanic about a year now.
Okay.
And my father goes, "Well, listen, what do you think? Because if you're not interested, if you want to stay there, I understand. You want to stay with Millar and be a mechanic. If not, if you want to give this a try, but I got to make some decisions here because I'm getting a volume of business in that I need someone around totally
Sure.
full time." So with that, I said, "Listen, if I'm going to get aggravated over here at Millar, and basically just through that accident on what happened, no one's fault except whoever vandalized the doors to have and no lighting in a hallway."
Right.
I said, "I might as well get aggravated with you." But when I said that, Matt, I had hair. So after 30-something years working for Dag, rest his soul now, I lost those babies right away, let me tell you.
That's awesome. So jumped out into consulting. You told me And you kind of alluded to it just a minute ago that was unusual. So you said your dad had seen an opportunity in consulting. What was the opportunity? What was he looking at and saying, "Hey, this is where I need to go"?
Well, that's very interesting because he was with Westinghouse, probably the third guy in the ladder at the New York office, which is their premier office around the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he had seen a lot of other managers and district VPs or EVPs come and go, and it would be an over and under if the guy's from Texas or if he's from, whatever, the Carolina, how long they would last. And mostly non-New Yorkers don't usually last too long in senior executive positions, especially in a big company or a trade company, a company like an elevator company. So with that being said, he saw that the industry was changing. See, years ago, Westinghouse and Otis, you had clients and you were fighting for the same pool of work, but it was always the high-end owners doing Rock Center, doing rebuilding, setting Third Avenue up. So they would do all the preliminary work as a courtesy. They would look at the architect drawings. They would tell you what their options would be for equipment. They possibly even do layout drawings. And this is before they even have the job, just to try and get the job. Right. And then they would price it up and obviously network and try and get the owners to pick them over their competition. And he saw that all of a sudden that kind of let's do above and beyond for the client was going away, particularly those upfront designs that they weren't making any money off of. Right. So he says, this is the industry's changing. How's an owner going to not know what he's buying ahead of time, with an architect just giving him numbers and figuring, so without real layouts. So he thought there'd be a great opportunity to have layout drawings done by owners that are looking to build buildings through an architect or directly with ownership. Most of his relations were directly with the owners.
Right.
So he went for it. And at the time he went for it, there were like 3 or 4 engineering firms in Manhattan, big name engineering firms that actually had elevated departments. So they would have, someone that retired out of Otis or someone younger that came over from Westinghouse, and they would be doing that as the architect and the engineer for the building. But other than that, there were a handful of people like my dad that were doing it on their own, maybe 8 of them all together. And some of the names you're aware of. Van Dusen was out there.
Sure.
Kajak was out there. Cadamiani was out there. Walsh came a little bit later. So I had said, there was one time back in the early 80s, one of the big elevator independents had a Christmas party, and he invited some people to a very nice Italian place in Midtown. It's famous for real estate and tradespeople to go to. And he had 3 tables. 2 tables were full with his employees. The other table was him with just the other 8 consultants. Hence, 25 years later, another company growing, another independent that's growing, hosts a party at a very famous venue, the 101 Club, or right next by Grand Central, and had 110 people there.
Okay.
So, I always joke, if it had stayed to those 8, I would have took this interview in person from my private jet, But
it a little bit of competition. The consultant, I guess, consulting industry really has seemed to grow a lot. And I haven't seen it as long as you have, but obviously you're a witness of that from 8 to 100 plus.
Yes. Well, and it was, listen, in the beginning it was a rough road for us too. No one knew what to do with us, right? The owners thought it was great because they were there. We're their advocate.
Sure.
We're protecting them. We got the knowledge. My father had the reputation of being, honest and a fighter. Sure. And they loved it. They grasped right away. Hey, this is something we need. These investments are big investments, and they're long-term investments.
Oh, sure.
For the elevators and the vertical transportation systems in the building. And but everybody else looked at us a little strange, right?
What the contractors think about you.
Yeah, that wasn't easy. I mean, at times, there might have been pretty close to fistfights, and it wasn't easy. They thought, well, what do we need them in our business? Why are they the expert? It was confrontational for a pretty long time there. I would say a good 15 years.
Wow. That's a long time to kind of feel that, the animosity. Maybe they felt like you were a threat or that you were the watchdog and they were going to,
Exactly. All of that, right? We were a threat that we would call them the task.
Sure.
Right. We were a watchdog looking at things, making sure the owner got what he was entitled to. But then, you know what? Every industry kind of feels its way out, right? So
Sure.
once they knew you were being truthful and honest and wanted the best for the client, then if they weren't happy with that, they were the wrong vendor.
Sure.
And now it's commonplace. And there's not a job really done in most of the cities that you don't have a consultant involved.
Right. Right. And so, yeah, obviously they understand your role, you understand theirs. And I am curious, as a consultant, it does seem like you do walk a bit of a fine line between, representing the owner and not, not totally offending the contractor, or maybe they're not the right one for the job. But talk to me through that just a little bit of what's that like to, is there a fine line, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so I'm gonna, contribute this to my mentor, which is my dad, right?
Yep.
You got to look in the mirror every morning.
Sure.
When you shave, even if you don't shave. And once in a while, I'm not looking for my hair, but I'm looking for shaving, right? And you got to be truthful to yourself.
Sure.
And it comes out in your day-to-day operation. It comes out with the people that you mentor and you hire. And that was the fine line, right? I want to be fair. I want to be able to sit in a meeting with my client next to me and the elevator company on the other side of the table and do what's right and fair to both sides of the table. Now, of course, I'm being paid by the client, so I'm always going to make sure I'm performing, but I'm not going to take advantage of anybody. My father
Sure.
trained me like that. I grew up that way as a kid. It's just, do I get mad? Do I get frustrated? Do we have to drop the hammer sometimes hard? Yeah, but if you could look at yourself in the mirror every day when you wake up, that's what he said. And it is a fine line. And, sometimes you lose an account over it,
Sure.
where you're like, no, you're trying to take advantage of the guy. He doesn't owe you that, or, I'm not asking for that.
Right.
It's not right to ask for that. I always found the most successful jobs we have is when everybody works well together. You
Sure.
want the elevator company to be on site, doing what they're supposed to do, what they're getting paid for, but making the money they need to make to stay in a prosperous company, keep the company going. At the
Right.
same side, the other side of the coin, don't take advantage of the client. If it's not due you and you owe it, then perform and do it.
Right. Right.
And that's why I'm blessed that my father trained everybody that came in under him, understood that philosophy. I've taken it. Now I have my two sons in the business. So
Cool.
besides my sister, who's my partner, we're into third generation with my two sons now. And there's other family members from my wife's, my sister's side, a son-in-law. And at one point, someone would say, Nick, do you hire, I said, first you got to be family, then I'll talk to you. But yeah, it's a fine line. And I think the industry's come around and it's worked pretty well with it. And there's always, people out there that, eventually their reputation, if it's not proper, to get caught up with, or
Yeah.
just, but it is a very fine line.
Yeah. No, thank you for speaking to that. So I'm curious, obviously you've been at it a while. You've seen a lot of change, a lot of evolution. You've seen all kinds of things happen. I'm curious, what are some of the challenges or issues you see facing maybe the industry or certain aspects of the industry as you look forward?
Oh, I think personnel, number one. I mean, just first of all, we require certain credentials, certain licensing. Those of us who have it are aging out.
Okay.
And the fact that the industry many years ago stopped flooding the contractors with helpers. Now you got retiring out mechanics who, if they're still healthy enough, are coming to maybe work for someone like me, either full-time or part-time, to do inspections if they have their credentials. But we're losing a whole generation there.
Yeah.
And we're not, when I've talked to the other leads of industry associations, and we're not grasping that the old formula is not going to work at a point. It's
Sure.
not going to be someone that started as a helper, worked so many years at that, then did 20 something years or 30 years as a mechanic, and then goes to be, the next inspectors for these required licensed inspectors. We're missing that middle piece.
Sure.
So everything requires experience, but we almost have to look at how we could substitute that 30 years of experience with education and training, because and particularly in New York, with these some 83,000 devices that get inspected twice a year now, besides the municipalities doing what they do,
Right.
where we don't have that next generation stepping up that are in there, even in, let's call it 50s.
Sure.
They're not coming into our end till, late 50s, 60s and older. So how are we going to fill that crevice? Never mind when you look as a vendor, if you have an elevator company, where are you finding these account reps?
Right.
Never mind the supervisors you need to watch your guys or help your guys that maybe aren't the greatest troubleshooters, right?
Right.
I mean, years ago, you had a super walked on your job once a week, and he was just there to make sure it was clean, make sure the cars ran well. You were doing what you're supposed. You were where you were supposed to be.
Right.
If I needed help, like we talked about earlier, I'd call Alsano, the assistant. Hey, I'm jammed up on this electrical problem. I can't figure it out. He'd come over. You work on it. Those days are over. Everybody's
Sure.
running now. Running. That's a great industry still to get into. But even the account reps and even sometimes the managers of regions have had no real field experience. Very smart people, very well, educated, but I can't have the same conversation I could have with them as I could have with a guy that spent 30 years in the field that's now in charge of modernization or in charge of repairs or in charge of maintenance, because they can't relate to what I'm trying to tell them on more so the technical, and this is the way it works
Right.
Not to take anything away from them. They're all well educated and all proper for that spot, with the exception of the industry's gone away from that history that when you were talking technical, you had to have lived it.
Yeah. No, there's definitely that tradition. But like you say, it's kind of going away. And so, it'll be interesting to see how some of those challenges are met. And you talked about the union is really stepping up with their training, and even some of the, like the elevator learning center that some of the non-union shops use. I know that they're doing a lot to try to fill that gap, but it feels like the gap's still there for sure.
I mean, there's, in my other office in Queens, I'm talking to you now from the Equitable Building, 120 Broadway, a very historical building in New York, very long history, great building. But the other office was a little residential. We converted to when we moved out of the basement where we started the business. So my dad started the business at the house. When we got to 14 people, my mother was like, "Who are these strangers coming and going every day? You better get out of here."
14's a lot to have in your basement.
And we expanded it. We actually dug it out to even get more at one point. But with that being said, the union would call, I think it was Local 1 for New York, the union would call, an opportunity for applications, and they would start sleeping out 2 days ahead of time. And they would circle the block, because we had the block with the post office on it. And that's where they could pick up the application when it was time to, whatever it was, 8 a.m. on, let's say Monday. They would be lining up over the weekend to try. So people want to be in this industry. They should. It's a great industry.
Sure.
It's a great way to make a living. It's a very lucrative one too, if you're willing to work, particularly if you're willing to do the overtime. I mean, people don't realize what, and rightfully so, because of the talent you need electrically, mechanically, and keep yourself safe. There's money. It's a good living, a very good living, besides annuities and everything else you could get. It really is. So the people want it. It's that I think we did the industry and probably corporate to a level, or the accounting, trying to save money. When they eliminated that tradition of a helper always with someone, they really just eliminated their future mechanics.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And that's one of the big ones. And then, of course, there's supply chain. These boards now, particularly what we've gone through, and you've all read it in the paper and heard it in the news, this chip shortage.
Sure.
I mean, look at I explain to non-technical people when I'm presenting to them, or I'm part of their team for a mod or a new install. It's like, you got to realize, how many of you have a computer that's older than 2 years old? You don't.
Right.
I said, your elevators are the leading computers in the world right now. What we're doing, it's all so that, those boards, those chips, the drive units, the components we need for drives, they're jobs that got delayed months now.
Right.
Because they weren't available during this whole, supply chain COVID thing. And that's, the industry's got to worry about that. But that also goes back to where we getting all this stuff from also.
True.
I'm a big believer we should be bringing some of that, or a lot of that, back to our beautiful country. But with that being said, those are the challenges too. And you can't go to a client and say, well, you know what, we can't get this board, so you're 3 months late. I mean, what kind of, they put up with it because of COVID and they saw it happening and the
Sure.
ships couldn't get in down low, but then no one wants to hear that. Imagine you did a mod in a residential building, a 1-car residential small building. Now they're walking up for 3 more months. You don't want to be.
Yeah. No, that's
there.
tough. That's tough for sure. So Nick, we're kind of running out of time, but I'm just curious. The last question I want to ask you is what's some advice you would give to someone who's maybe just starting out their career new and maybe they don't even know what they've bitten off. What is this elevator industry? They're just learning. What would you say to them?
Run? No, I'm only kidding. What's the old saying? The 7 rule, like show up on time,
Yeah.
right? Be prepared. In my day, prepared meant you had the pad, you had a pen, you had a rag on you. Okay.
Sure.
Be interested, right? I absorbed everything. I wanted to know how to change those solid state boards where everyone else, would have been interested. I wanted that. You got to be eager. You want to succeed.
Sure.
It's going to take some work, but it's a great, great industry. You're going to meet great people. You're going to learn amazing things. And it's perfectly, you could fill your whole career out and retire very successful, very comfortable financially, but it's all about the effort you want to put into it. And
Absolutely.
You see that, and you can kind of tell right away, particularly on more so the mechanical side, if you want to go into the field,
Sure.
but also the opportunity, because you've interviewed other people that came out of school with degrees and then now have their own elevator companies.
Sure.
So it's what you want to put into it. It's always there. It's a service business like any other service business, but be intuitive, be curious. How about be polite and eager to work?
Sure.
And there's no stopping you. There really is no stopping you. I mean, God bless me, my father did what he did, and it worked out with my mother's support and the other family members' support. And if you told me, in my freshman year in high school, if I'd be doing it, I'd say it probably, but would I have known I'd be where I am today? Thank God. No, not at all. I'm no genius. I mean, a lot of people out there that listen to this podcast agree to that comment. But what it is it's hard work and wanting to better yourself, better the industry. We all give back. Everyone,
Sure.
I could go down the list of people you interviewed and see what they give back, not only to our industry, but to charities. We're a very charitable group of people, particularly the people that have worked hard to be successful. And people should say, oh, well, they own a bit, they could do. No, they don't have to do that. We do
Sure.
that because we want to do it. The Elevator Escalator Safety Foundation, our own foundation within our industry, to help, and believe it or not, to help children be cautious of what to do, how to ride an escalator. I mean, all the elevator companies, all the retired elevator mechanics, they support that. It's a nonprofit. Yeah. And if you ever did it, I've done it, but maybe Matt, if there's one that used to go on, we used to do classes in person. When you see those 2 kids and ask you the question in the hallway after the seminar saying, I asked, did you learn anything? And the kid goes, yes, I did. And he grabs his little buddy's hand. We have to hold hands in the handrail when we get on the escalator, and this is from a 2nd grader.
That's awesome.
Your heart just, lights up.
Yeah.
But that's our industry. We give back. We're part of the real estate industry. We participate in all of those events, but just want to do it, I guess is a simple one-liner. You have to want to do it and you will be successful.
Beautiful. That was a perfect. Nick, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the interview. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you the best as you continue to build your business and keep people going up and down in New York.
Thank you. I appreciate the time and you reaching out. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group, a leader in elevator industry recruiting. You can check us out online at elevatorcareers.net. Please subscribe, and until next time, stay safe.